be with you. Well, over these weeks and weeks that we have adjusted schedules and tried to figure out how to do things in-house and with everybody in close quarters, I know each individual household has had to try and figure out ways to best cope and keep each other sane. In our household, and I've heard in many others, there's been a lot of board games played. There's been a lot of puzzles put together. And there's been a lot of streaming going on, binge watching of shows as people are just looking for things to do. One of the channels that we get in our house, we started to notice that over a few weekends they were playing marathons of individual Pixar franchise movies. So one weekend they had all the Monster Inc. movies. The next weekend they had 3 of the 4 Toy Story movies. I think Toy Story 4 is a little too new still to have television rights for it. So as I have been watching all of these shows in successive order and watching a lot of family movies, it has occurred to me just how much of a storied people we are. Stories have a profound effect on us. They shape us, they mold us, they subtly and sometimes overtly change the way we think about things and maybe even the way we do things. And a lot of us don't even notice it because we're so used to being influenced by stories, movies, books, comics, all of these different things. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about that today and just how there's this word in the Greek, which is psyche, and that is often used in the New Testament and elsewhere to describe sort of the inner life. It can be used to describe that part of us that animates the flesh. So what are we, when we're not sleeping? What is it that makes us who we are? Sometimes it's used in reference to the soul. But we even derive our English word psyche from it, and I think that is a good example of what I'm talking about, that part of us that thinks, that rationalizes, that emotes, that makes decisions and moves us in certain directions. So how is the psyche, how are we influenced by what we see and what we hear? And I just want to use the Toy Story first 3 movies that we watched as a family as kind of a test case. Now, please do not think that I have a beef against Pixar. Pixar has made many movie that I have deeply appreciated, even would consider some of my favorite movies. I would really go so far as to say I think Pixar as a studio might be the single best storytelling studio out there right now. And I'm not just talking about animation. I just really think they handle story and they understand how to tell story very, very well. But even saying that, there are certain Pixar movies that I think have very good morals to them and sort of uplift us, teach us, strengthen our character, fill us internally. And then there are other ones where I get a little bit of a bad vibe from. If you think about them too long or too hard, you start to feel like there's something a little bit corruptible going on underneath the surface, whether that is intentional or not. I know that's my opinion. So let me just kind of walk you through the premise of Toy Story 1, 2, and 3. Hopefully this is not really considered spoilers. I'm assuming by this point many people have seen these. If you don't know anything about Toy Story and you don't want to know anything about Toy Story, please don't watch this video. But let me just give you some simple things. I mean, in the first case, the first movie, the idea is quite simply, what if your toys had lives of their own, what would that look like? And essentially, the purpose for the toys is just to make sure that they're in a home with a good owner, someone who plays with them, someone who is creative, but uses their creativity in productive ways, as opposed to owners who are destructive, those kids that break their toys, destroy their toys. We all sort of knew those kids growing up, and maybe we even were those kids growing up. And that's the very simple premise of the story. It was a neat idea, it was kind of fun, and it was interesting to think about your toys as living their own lives. By the time you get to the second Toy Story, very similar premise. It actually expands the premise, introduces some new characters. In my personal opinion, I think Toy Story 2 does the best with the material because it makes the entire movie a fun adventure. Whereas in the first one, some of the main character interactions are based upon jealousy that toys have of newer toys. And that makes it a little bit hard, in my opinion, to identify with the main characters. There's just this weird rift going on for most of the movie. Second one doesn't have that. They're all working together for a common goal. And this time the premise is about, is it better to be played with an owner, even though you know you'll only have a limited time doing that, or to be preserved in a toy museum where people can admire you for years and years to come, but won't necessarily play with you, have hands-on interaction with you. While this also was a very good idea, it introduces, I think, one of the major flaws to the story, which is what happens when your owners grow up? What happens when people stop playing with you as toys? That idea really gets fleshed out in the third one. And in all fairness, my kids will tell you the same thing. I cannot watch Toy Story 3 without crying at the end. It doesn't matter how many times I've seen it. It doesn't matter if I know it's coming or not. There's just a very bittersweet thing because that movie is about finally the owner of the toys has grown up and is moving off to college, and therefore all of the toys are sort of abandoned, and they're going through this existential crisis of what's going to become of them, and are they going to be separated, and will they ever get played with again? So there's this very bittersweet moment at the end where the old owner who's going off to college passes his toys off to a younger child who he knows will play with his toys, and he thinks that's better for them. And very much a tearjerker moment. But as we were watching this marathon, it occurred to me that you have spent so much time identifying with the toys that you have developed this subtle aversion to people. People can actually be, in our minds, the problem, because all we want is for these toys to have a happy home and to be played with. But by default, we can't prevent the children from growing up and not playing with the toys anymore. So we actually start to think the people are unfair and ungrateful because they won't play with their children's toys anymore, even though they're 18 years old at this point. And that's just a little bit off in and of itself. So I started asking myself, where is God in this story? And I don't mean that the story has to directly reference God, but I noticed they never talk about a creator for the toys. The toys just are. There are lots of jokes about toys not realizing they're toys when they come out of the box, and that sort of takes an existential toll on them. But there's never any person who has made them, and therefore there's never really an identifiable purpose for them, except to be played with, which they know inevitably their owners are going to outgrow them, and then they are just going to be left in this ongoing existence with no purpose anymore. And that, if you stop and think about it, is horrifying. And I'm not suggesting that kids pick up on that. I'm not even suggesting that most adults pick up on that. I'm just suggesting that there are always subtle things in how you tell stories that deeply make us question the world around us and shape the way we view the world around us. After this last viewing, I almost saw the toys in the Toy Story franchise as almost vampire-like, where they're just these undead things that are not going to die, even though all of the world around them keeps changing, all of the loved people in their lives keep moving on and moving away. And there's just kind of this underlying hopelessness to it. And that is where I think we need to be careful about what are the stories that we're telling and what are the stories that we are absorbing that over time predispose us to more and more relativism, more and more ideas that there is no creator and that we don't have a purpose in this life. For those of us who believe in Jesus and who read his word, that is not the story that we are told in the Bible. We see that God created us with great love and purpose. That yes, the world around us is decaying and we are decaying along with it because of a moral fracture that we all have. But that God has not abandoned us to that, and God is not forsaking us and just causing us to live on in a purposeless life, but God actually loved us enough to send his Son to the people Israel to redeem his chosen people so that the light of the world might go out to the rest of us who are not part of that called out race from Abraham. And that gives us incredible hope. That gives us incredible purpose. That makes life redeemed and redeemable. And I just want to quote for you some words from the apostle written to New Testament believers in Jesus, to the church at Philippi, as the apostles trying to challenge the way they look at the world. And it'd be very easy seeing all of the suffering and imprisonment that the apostles are going through as cause to despair. But in this letter to the Philippians, the apostle keeps talking about hope and joy and rejoicing. And then finally, towards the end of the letter in chapter 4, verses 8 and 9, he says, "Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice, and the God of peace will be with you." And to that I say, amen. May it be so, Lord. May these eternal words continually come to pass. We should spend some time discerning what the competing narratives of the world are. What are the stories that are popular? What are the stories that we are drinking in and allowing our kids to drink in? And do they build up our faith and our hope in the beautiful and lovely and true things of this world, or do they undermine them and accidentally create a different worldview that causes us to dehumanize each other and to see our existence as hopeless? My hope is that we get better at understanding the true story so that we can better encourage each other and see it in our own lives, that we can look to those people who are living the faith well, and we can not just admire them, but practice what we see in them and follow them and keep walking down this road of faith. So in these ongoing times of pandemic, may the peace of God be with you. Amen.